Well, I heard that someone was wanted to come along, but you've heard nothing there, so that's not materialised.
Nothing in relation to anything on the agenda this evening. Yeah. Not that I'm aware of.
Well, you
I'm sure I would have think. I would have been told. I hope.
absolutely. Well, us probably. So,
Well, welcome everyone to this meeting of the Hartland Town Council Planning Committee meeting. Meeting of the Hartland Town Council Planning Committee even on Tuesday, the 9th of August. I won't go through the procedurals because we've got no members of the public present. So on to apologies for absence, Carl.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we've apologies from Councillor Turnbull, Councillor Hill, and Councillor Cousin, all of which are on holiday.
Thank you very much, Carl. Are we minded to accept those? All in favour? Lovely. Item 2, any declarations of interest from councillors? Can't see any. I am making a personal non-pecuniary declaration in the items at 77 and 95 Overston Road, given the proximity to my house. However, given I do not have a pecuniary interest, I'm advised that I can still take part in the meeting. So I will still take part in those items. Okay, on to item 3, the minutes of the meeting of the Planning Committee held on the 19th of July. Are we happy to take those to the true record? All in favour? Lovely.
yeah, now make a comment. I'm too late to comment on minutes of the previous meeting to that, but it's something that will come up time and time again.
Yeah.
There was one item where I declared, as you have declared a personal opportunity interest.
Yeah.
And furthermore, absenting myself from the discussion. The minute recorded my declaration of interest, but didn't record that I absented myself from the discussion. Past is the past, that's fine. But my request is that going forward, actually, the minutes should record if a councillor has not participated in the discussion because of an interest.
Yeah,
If that is the case.
So did you leave the room?
I didn't, on officer advice, I didn't participate in the discussion. I didn't vote. I didn't leave the room.
Okay, so we would only minute it if the councillor would actually physically remove themselves from the meeting.
Okay.
We wouldn't minute if a councillor informed us that they weren't going to speak on a particular item.
Okay.
I believe I have some minutes to sign, Carl.
You do. You happy to do those? That's all right.
Oh, I can do it, yeah. Yeah. Very happy to do that. Item 4, public questions in accordance with Standing Orders 22 and 23.
None received, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any letters of objection?
None received.
Perfect. Now, I believe I'm supposed to be taking item 7 before item 6. Is that correct?
Yeah, Chair, I just think that would be sensible. There's a slight error in the ordering. Given that officially I understand the District Council new call-in process is in place, it might be sensible to discuss and agree that now, in case the committee wishes to utilise its new roll-ins and call-ins on latter applications.
Perfect. Do you want to go through the report?
Yes, Chair. So I can give a brief introduction to it if you wish me to. Yep. So this is on page 22, this starts. So I won't go over the key points in the actual short cover report, but what I did just want to say is, by way of intro, the key thing here to consider is the Appendix A, which is the town council process. So the flow chart that you've got in front of you there has been put together focusing on the merits of call-ins based on whether the town council approves or objects what is proposed in the actual application. What it isn't written to do is to focus on whether the town council thinks the decision itself should be taken by officers or by committee. So I just flagged that now. Now, it is the committee could decide that it wishes to have that second focus. But it's just worth pointing out that the way that that's written at the moment, that wasn't in mind when we were writing that. Yeah. The other thing I'd just like to say as intro, before asking any questions and discussion, is that I understand the District Council are going to be reviewing their new approach in 6 months' time. So whatever is agreed in terms of the town council process this evening, I think it would be wise that that's reviewed, maximum in 3 months' time. So we know that whatever is agreed this evening is working appropriate and right for us within that process. There's some other points that I may make in the discussion, Chair, but otherwise that's it for the opening.
Thank you, Town Clerk. Any comments from councillors on this item?
Yes, please, Chair. The town clerk and I have discussed this very subject by email today. And he made the point that it had a particular focus and not a different focus. And I think that's worth airing because the town council's role so far as statutory consultee has simply been to produce a recommendation of approval or refusal. And sometimes we sort of sat on the fence, conditional on it not harming the immunity of neighbours, then no objection, which is a bit of a grey area. But basically, we comment on the application, whether we favour it or disfavour it. Now, to my mind, given my admittedly limited district council experience, the purpose of the call-in is somewhat different. The councillor making the call-in, obviously at 20 years in, but the councillor making the call-in is not saying whether he favours the application or not. What he's saying is that, in his opinion, there's an issue of principle or policy which ought to go to the committee rather than be decided by an officer, which is, as Carl has alluded to, is a different focus from whether the application is favoured or not. Now, we're in new territory. I personally had seen parishes, town council involvement in call-ins, or simply involvement with call-ins, that's been separate to what it's historically done, giving a few whether favours or disfavours. And therefore, it seems to me, if I'm right, that where in this page 24, the town council resolving to object is a precondition of a call-in. That isn't how I would see it. I would see there's two processes. We have a view, favour or disfavour, and we have a separate view. Do we think this should go to a committee rather than send our officers? Now, often the two will go together because object and do a call-in. Not automatically do a call-in, but the instance where we do a call-in because we've objected. It's perfectly logical for us to see as a point of principle not to do a committee without it as outright saying we object. So I personally would have done this slightly differently. And some of us in this room have district experience, some don't. Mine was rather limited. So yeah, that's what I used.
Thank you, Councillor Butterworth. I think it's worth saying that I think what you were saying to Councillor Hill by email was about the fact that the decision will only go to district committee if they're due to be approved, won't they?
Yeah, that's correct. So a call-in will only be applied if the officer is recommending approval.
Yeah. And
in that case, there is the necessary call-in triggered with the parish council or the committee member or the ward councillor, or a mix of three. And there are also third party or neighbour objections. So if an officer, so the default is it will be an officer decision,
yeah,
as it stands at the moment. If that decision by officer is to refuse, then a call-in won't happen in any case under the new system.
Yeah. So I think it's in terms of whether it will be considered, if we're not refusing or expressing concern, given that we're happy with the proposal and it gets rejected, I don't know that it would come to committee. I'm not entirely sure when we would use that power. If we're, I can't think of an example where we're happy with something where if it was approved, we would want it to be called into committee just to confirm it. Unless you can think of one.
No, I can't. Not really. No, not. Because think about it, the underlying principle of planning is that approval is assumed. And to refuse is, if you like, the exception, you have to justify. That's the underlying principle of planning is, as I say, normally, I think people forget that, but the assumption is that normally.
But when do you might have to.
No.
When do you call in as as district councillor? You said it begins something to the effect that it can be considered that
Yes.
this is too big, ugly.
Because you can't take a predetermined.
Because you can't predetermine.
Predetermined,
Okay,
yes.
fine, okay. The town council is not going to be part of that final decision, so predetermination in that sense is not relevant. But on the other hand, as in the call-in, we were simply saying to go to committee. We weren't saying outright we object because we wouldn't, because we couldn't go with predetermination. So logically, it seems to me the town council is in a similar position, simply saying at this stage we don't go to committee. And if we're saying in a separate communication we don't like it because, or then that's a separate communication. And another way of looking at it, of course, is that the same call-in wording has to work for the town council. Let's say the town council initiates it, and the two councillors, district councillors, who endorse it. So we can't have different technical wording for the town council compared with what the district council have to sign up to. Because it's envisaged that the district, if the town council initiates, the two district councils involved are simply going to say, I agree. They're not going to put it right in their own words. They're going to say, I agree.
I mean, I've seen that, the new call-in form, the old call-in form, you indicated on it whether you were whether you're calling it in if the officer is minded to refuse,
exactly.
Or if the officer is minded to grant. And occasionally, in some of us, I think a bit bizarrely, people call in both ways.
Yes, we can't do that now.
No, it does make sense, actually.
My point was rather if, as it is going to be now, if all call-ins are if minded to grant rather than if minded to refuse, I can't think of an example in which we wouldn't have an objection in order to want it called in.
Let me give an example. For example, we've just put solar panels on the back of our house in the conservation area with a certificate of lawfulness. Right, okay. I know it's an involved process, obviously. Now, had we applied to put panels, it would have been a plan permit application, I think, on the front of the house. That would have been unusual in the sense that I'm not aware of any solar panels on the front of the house in the conservation area. So it would have raised an issue of principle. Now, it would have been quite legitimate in that hypothetical situation for the town council to say, well, not really very sure one way or the other. But actually, it's such an important point of principle, we would like it to go to committee.
But would we resolve no objection if we have? I can take the point. I'm not convinced that if we considered that there was an objectable reason why it shouldn't be accepted, that we wouldn't send it to a resolution of express concern or refusal in any case.
You might express concern about that, but
yeah, but my point is that would cover us under this process.
It doesn't cover, well, I suppose the system doesn't, but wanting it to go to committee if one's minded to challenge the refusal.
That's the reason now. No, you can't do it.
You can't do it. So I'm saying, because you can't do it.
Yeah.
Which I guess, if you can't do it, I suppose it's not logical, is it, to do a call in other than through refusal, because you can't do it the other way.
Or an express concern.
You can't do it, so it's academic, isn't it? You can only do it through a refusal.
Yeah, and I think what we might have to do on this, I think to sort of marry up the positions, is we might have to express concern where previously we might have said
well, that's my
no
point.
objection subject.
This is forcing us to do something we wouldn't otherwise have done.
But the whole process is forcing us to do something we
No,
wouldn't
it's not. It's given us an option.
No, but my point is, previously we would have had options not we, but the district councillors would have had options to either call in for refuse or accept. So there would have been more options in the process. it makes sense that if the district council is changing its process, we might have to adapt in some ways to that process, but I can't.
But that's. Don't move on then.
Pardon?
So, anyway. But I would also make the point that the way this is written, that the objection is a precondition of the call-in, is not something which is in the district council's instructions. So either because they don't think that's the way it should work, or because they didn't think of it. We don't know which, we're guessing somewhat, but it's not what the district council laid down. So we are adding a layer where we've not been told to add the layer.
No, but then we are a layer. Like the town council itself exists because of the fact that we're an independent body to the district council in this process.
Yes, but we're participating in the district council process. It's not something we're given by statute. It's the district council that's given us this extra role. We're clearly not going to resolve this here and now.
I mean, Chair, on that particular point, I think the district council have, if you like, created the opportunity for town and parishes to have a greater role in the call-in. And they haven't really been prescriptive as to how the town or parish decides whether they want to call in. And that's our job really, or the town and parish's job, to set out a process for how they do that. So this is one way of doing it, and I appreciate the kind of the different points and alternatives.
Yeah.
But it is up for the town council to decide how it wishes to trigger whether it supports a call-in or not. This is one way of doing it. You know, there may well be alternatives, but we do need to decide what that trigger is, because otherwise we'll be in a tricky position in two ways. One, in that when we're considering applications, how do we decide at that point whether whether we want to call in or not? Or the opposite is, if a district councillor on a committee approaches us wishing to get our support for a call in, how do we then determine whether it's something we support or not? And that's why the planning committee having a clear trigger and process is really, really important.
And I would say the other issue is, if we don't, and I think this is the most logical trigger and process, if you don't, we are going to be inundated with people saying, oh, can you do a call, please? It's refused.
Just if I could just offer one more thing at this point, the issue with this as written at the moment is that it doesn't completely fit with the way in which the committee makes resolutions, because at the moment we do create some grey areas, because we're either yes, no, or kind of in between. So you would have to, having listened to Councillor Butterworth and others, we would have to consider one or two things if you were to agree this as written, and that is either the committee going forward only commits one way, approve or reject, or we change the wording of this to reflect that middle option where you express concern. So you could say, if you resolve to express concern, object, or recommend refusal, that maybe covers off an alternative. But
So-
one way, somebody needs to.
That's a long way to make my point, actually.
So
Because I don't agree with the way it's written, but in terms of logic, if we're expressing concern, tantamount to my point, if we're sufficiently concerned, they're not doing a committee. Although, even though it's not a positive, we want to refuse it, it is that halfway house which I was looking for.
Yeah.
So I think that does it.
So, sorry, what personally, what I think our process should be, and I accept that there are lots of views, but is I think if we recommend refusal, we should automatically trigger a call-in on a recommendation of refusal.
No. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt, but no.
Personally, I think we should automatically recommend, if we're recommending refusal, that should automatically trigger a call-in, and then we would need to separately resolve on a call-in if we express concern, because if we express concern, it's about the level to which we express concern. So that's my personal position.
Over my 3 years on the district, I think there were probably 40 call-ins in Westward. Okay. Now, the call-in was only ever supposed to be if there's an issue of policy or principle which merits the committee looking at it, not merely an officer. And the reason we've got this new regime is that there was a feeling, rightly or wrongly, that some councillors were triggering it to these residents, or where it was simply the neighbour might be affected, but it's not the community as a whole, not the street scene. So they wanted to reduce the number of call-ins. But there is a formula of words, and it was rehearsed as this went through St Albans Committee, but it's not come out in this guidance, which I summarise as it is upon the principle of policy, which directors are directed by committee. It's something to that effect. And unless that's true, there shouldn't be a call-in. And that's the whole reason for having these 3 tiers, to filter out what with regards to the immaterial.
Yes, I hear what you think. I would just point out you shouldn't the only grounds for recommending refusal are on policies.
Well, sorry, that's not the right technical wording. I'm sorry. It's a matter of policy or principle of sufficient import.
Yes.
That it merits consideration by committees. There's novelty.
Which is how it's always been, because historically, and I probably sat on town planning committee for 14 years out of 12 years out of 16. Okay. It by no means all refusals are called in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we shouldn't have that position. We couldn't go.
The point I would make with this is, as Councillor Butterworthy rightly say, the point of having 3 people in the process is that it cuts down. My point would be, this committee only has one point at which we can say call in or not, because we're not going to meet every week and have a conversation with district councillors about call-ins. The officers might well, but the committee isn't. So if we're assuming that we are the first point in which we're presenting to district councillors items that they may wish to consider for a call-in, it would strike me that a sensible way to do that is to cover our base and then let the district councillors who are elected to filter that down into a more acceptable level of call-ins for the district council planning committee to filter it down.
Can I just say, I think when some people put in a planning application, they're testing the water. It's not a yes or no. They're saying how is this, can this be accepted? And if they get a knockback of no, then they're going to go, okay. And then they're going to put in another, and they're going to react to it. Now, you will get some people who will put in a planning application, get it turned down, and they're not happy, and they never will be.
Yeah.
But I do think that some people do work the system, correct, not playing the system, they're working the system to get at something which is acceptable.
Yeah.
And I think that, in effect, if you call in everything that the town council planning refuse, then I understand what you're saying about, you're giving those people that opportunity to have it called in, but I think that it is treating the process as though it doesn't allow for people to be using the system properly.
I'm not sure I quite understand.
I think I know where you're coming from. And I mean, the thing is, I think if we did try, if you said every refusal was a call,
yeah,
I think it undermines the standing of I think it would seriously undermine the standing of this committee. If you went for every single refusal
to be discretionary.
But the point is, surely that's in the wording, because we have, if you go through the flow chart, do you resolve, reject and recommend refusal? Yes. Well, then you can make a decision whether you want to initiate a call-in or not.
Mm.
So you don't have to do a call-in every. And I mean, normally, when I've looked at them, you would look at policies and you would take a view on basically how, for whatever reason you're minded to refuse, whether you feel it is sufficient at whatever you're looking at, the development, the alteration, whatever it is you're looking at, whether it is sufficient that it needs to be discussed in committee. You can't assume that every single refusal needs to be discussed by the committee. I mean, if you did, we'd revert back to bad old days of 10-hour planning meetings or something.
That wasn't the point I was making, though. The point I was making is if we have to, so as I understand it, I might be wrong, so tell me if I am, but as I understand it, we have to be one of the signatories in the process.
That's an option.
Right, so,
It could be town council and 2 district councillors, or it could be 3 district councillors without the town council.
right,
It doesn't have to be town council.
in that case, take it back. Because my point was basically, given where I thought the position was, if we don't put in, then the district councillors are hamstrung by the fact that we haven't done it. If that's not the case, then
We're an extra, we're not a prerequisite.
That it's in a sense, it's giving us a little bit extra say so because it's giving us the power to initiate a call-in, whereas it used to be only a district council, and usually, not always, but usually that would be after they've been approached by whoever to say, would you consider doing a call-in?
And that's why this system is better in many respects, because the call-in was done before,
Yes.
maybe for some high street properties which are prominent and, we don't decide their own initiative. Otherwise, it's if someone knows they can contact a councillor and ask for a call-in.
I mean, you've got to, but I mean, for instance, we had something came up that we thought was,
Yeah.
I don't know, serious adverse effect, let's say, on something on say the conservation area.
Yeah.
It just gives us that option.
But we're looking at it methodically, which is
Yes.
better than it simply being a
And it gives us that
neighbour.
option.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I also think that, going back, I understand that, you don't think that necessarily automatically doing a calling on refusal is the right thing. But I think we do have to show that we are thinking about things on a number of different levels in each case. That we do possibly prioritise conservation areas or locally listed properties. And then we take it further in all general applications. That we show some judgment, we just don't refuse that that's cool. And I think that gives us more.
Yes, it does.
Absolutely. No.
It's not saying, it doesn't say if you're minded to recommend refusal, you must do a call.
No.
It's giving us the option to decide.
Yeah, I agree. It doesn't set out the criteria though, and I know it was discussed as it went through committees and norms, and it might be worth asking the governments, what do you think as an opens other criteria for it? I thought it existed before, we're in a new regime here, and nothing hadn't come through here, because there were wanted consistency amongst all the parishes involved.
Yeah, so the criteria is it has to be on planning grounds and therefore has to refer to planning policy, either in the MPPF, the neighbourhood plan, or the existing local plan.
That's
In
true.
other words,
But
it's
a
not
refusal has to
fundamentally
anyway, so what's special about a call-in that makes it puts you in call-in territory over and above an ordinary refusal? That's the one we don't have.
Well, in the new process, it's because all decisions are automatically delegated to officers unless a call-in is triggered.
No, that was it. That existed before.
No, previously. So what I mean is this point around officers recommending approval. Officers recommending refusal can no longer be challenged at call-in. So that's the big change. So where there are material planning concerns by the 3 people or an originator and 2 other people, the referral form or the calling form still needs to set out in planning terms what the concerns are.
Yes.
So that's all the same. The big difference is it'll only get triggered
True.
based on a certain officer recommendation now, whereas before that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yes, basically, the fundamental change is that you can only challenge, if you like, and put in a call in. Yeah, if you're minded to approve, which there is a certain logic to that. I mean, although the precedent was refused by the energy market. Yeah.
Okay.
right. So going back to the proposal that we've got set out here, what changes do we wish to make?
Well,
Or are we happy with the?
Well, basically, I think it sets out logically what the process is. Is the planning committee resolved to object and recommend refusal? If yes, then if that's the case, then we take a view on whether we wish to resolve to initiate a call-in.
Okay.
I think, Chair, just the only additional thing is to consider is whether that object and recommend refusal is enough, or
Yeah,
do you want to cover off that express concern resolution you might make?
well, taking over years of experience, I can't think normally that you would call in if you're expressing concern, because if you're
But it's still then going on though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it would be covered off by taking the word and the word or, because an express concern is an objection. You're expressing.
Yes, you're
concern.
expressing, yes.
I guess, Chair, only if the committee explicitly says that
Only if
in
it
the
explicitly-
resolution.
It only,
That they
you
object.
actually have to use specific wording. If you're expressing concern, it's a bit sort of lukewarm, isn't it? You don't like it very much, but it might be okay.
I mean, if that's what we mean to cover, then let's say, use those words, I'd say.
So if the committee objects, express concerns or recommendations. Or yes. Whichever wording is easiest for you, Chair.
Well, I would say I surely should be resolved to object and recommend refusal or express concern.
I mean, I think it's better to keep it wider at this point.
Yes.
So that when we go to review,
So the next bit down, you can,
yeah,
that's when you narrow it.
yeah.
down.
And then, Chair, in terms of the next two steps, are they okay once set out? I guess the next one down, do you then wish to resolve to initiate a call-in? I think this is where we'll really benefit from a 3-month review of this, because it's nice and wide at the moment. You may see in 3 months that actually you're only initiating call-ins for conservation purposes or something like that. So down the line, that may give us a natural criteria. But for now, not specifying that you will only call in if it's to do with X, Y, Z, that's probably helpful.
I think over the years, I've done a reasonable number of call-ins over the years before I decided to retire. Yes, I mean, frequently was because it was conservation area, streets, but you would sometimes, but you would also get it if you thought there was I have seen one or two, for instance, when real concerns about adverse effect on neighbours or about the sheer size. So yes, you have to just got to look at it on a case by case basis and have a look and see what's before you.
I do think it's odd that St Albans has not set down a criteria for a call-in, because there are 3 people who have to agree it. If there's no script, the criteria by which I have to agree, it's going to be random.
It's very difficult. Once you start setting down criteria, you then get yourself into a bit like best loan agreement, which is one that says I owe you 20 quid. You can't argue about it. From my banking days, if you start setting out criteria, you may not mean to, but you might find that you have made an exception of something that should be considered. It's very difficult if you set out criteria.
Then it's going to be a difficult learning process, as the 3 signatories actually coalesce as to whether this is something.
Well, what I would say will, but I think if you could, I don't see how you can have any criteria other than that any call-in has to be based on planning policies.
Yeah.
And the, MPPF or whatever. I don't see how you can have any other criteria.
Right, I think we have an agreement on, unless there's anything else, Carl, that I missed.
On my other point, and maybe I was being a bit over technical, in the 4th square, it says common form using the planning resolution. Technical, it'll be based on, but for formal technical reasons, there may be adaptations and changes in the wording. So using might be a bit prescriptive unless it doesn't meant to be, but it can certainly be based on the planning resolution.
Does the unit using preclude that?
I think what I really mean by this is using the planning policies that are set out in the planning committee resolution.
Yes.
So what we wouldn't do is use different policies. So if you agree a set of policies and then outside of this, a district councillor comes to us as officers and says, we support this call in, and by the way, we want to use X, Y, and Z policy that the committee didn't decide. As officers, we'd be in a tricky spot because you may have considered them, decided you didn't like them, didn't agree with them. So I think if we add in using the policies or the planning policies within the planning committee resolution, that does mean afterwards we could perhaps add language and add weight to them without deviating away from the policies that you want. That's what we intended.
Fine, just not very sure, that's fine.
Call-in work. if the old one worked, that you did it and did you whatever you wanted, and then related it to the relevant policies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sorry, just before I finish, it's looking, and I mean, this is existing scheme of delegation, not the new one. And the only guidance given criteria is all callings must be made on material planning grounds. Well, refusal must be unlawful. You can talk to the planning officer. You've got to set out the material planning considerations in the call-in. There's no further. Was there anything on the intranet? Any guidance? Is there any guidance on the intranet? Is it all?
I tend to use the. I
For the
haven't
names,
seen-
it's the new NS. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen anything.
Because it's that, yes, it is on material planning consents, i.e. has to fit in with the planning policies,
Yeah, obviously.
but you can't do anything else. You can't call it because you personally don't like the appearance of the problem, obviously. But
Just-
I want to occasionally.
Yeah.
Just to bring this, so I think we've agreed to the proposal for initiating a call-in. What I think I'm still a bit concerned about is if we are not initiating a call-in, but we are approached to support a call-in, we don't currently have a process. And it won't come to this committee, I assume, so I assume that the time lag will be too significant between our meetings that we can do that on an ad hoc. So this is sort of what I was trying to get at earlier, is if a district councillor wishes to initiate a call-in, we don't have any process to support that call-in. And that means it's harder for that call-in to happen because we're one of the people that can sign it off. And so I don't know whether it's appropriate to have a policy on that, or whether that's delegated responsibility, or whether that's.
Yeah, so in my mind, Chair, how that would work is if a district councillor approached us to support a call-in and this committee had already considered whether it had already considered the application and said, no, we don't want to initiate a call-in, then that would be us not supporting the call-in. So that would be quite straightforward. I'm not sure what would change. If district councillors came to us before, say, the meeting this evening and said, will you support this? Then the committee will obviously have the opportunity to consider that when they've got the application in front of us. The third scenario will be rare, I would imagine, and it's mainly where the rare circumstances where our meetings don't quite fall right. I know there was an example, maybe over Christmas or something like that. On the rare occasion where we don't quite fit in with a comment period or we're right up against it, in that scenario, we would have to use our urgent decision-making powers under the standing orders, which would do any committee, which is essentially, in this case, it would be a recommendation by me through the town mayor, deputy mayor, in that case, under those formally, let's say. But I think I would imagine in that scenario, I would take views of the planning committee if time allowed to help shape that.
Yeah.
But I think that would be quite a rare thing because you meet every 2 weeks.
Yes.
It should be okay.
So just to be clear, in a scenario in which we recommended refusal but do not initiate a call-in, and a district councillor wishes to call it in, possibly off the back of us recommending refusal, we wouldn't then support that call-in because of the fact that we haven't resolved to initiate a call.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's 99.9% of the cases. When one possibility, of course, would be a councillor would say, "Oh, you didn't consider such and such a policy." We looked at everything, we didn't miss that. Hopefully, it wouldn't happen very often, and maybe you just have to use the emergency urgent action process.
Yeah,
once in 5 years it happens.
we would be in a tricky spot there. So because formally we would have to, under standing orders, we would have to revisit a decision by council, which would require a special resolution and extraordinary meeting. So we're in a slightly tricky spot.
Yeah.
I guess where we could more easily reconsider is if something has changed. So not necessarily if we haven't considered something on what's in front of us, but say something has changed. And there is a really live example of this at the moment that we need to deal with outside of this committee next week, and that is there is an application that this committee has considered and objected to that now actually has amended plans, which potentially are different to, it's quite a significant difference. And so there isn't a natural process for this committee to reconsider them because those amended plans aren't a new application, therefore don't appear on this list here. So in that scenario there, say you had originally said, you know, we're not too worried about this, and then amended plans come forward, you would then want to have the ability to reconsider, and we would deal with that under urgent business and find a way of doing that. But we would be a bit stuck if, as with all of our committees, if the resolution was taken and we hadn't thought of something that would change things, then we would be tricky as we would be as CSC. And,
What you can't do is say, oh, well, okay then, because the resolution's been taken, so you would have to go through some sort of formal process.
But the
before there
facts
was
have
time.
changed. The facts have changed.
Yeah.
Which is tricky because we don't, we look at applications, we don't look at amended applications. We don't have that process. We don't have
if the facts have changed or documents that have changed since this committee's reviewed something, then absolutely you're in the right to reconsider our position. If the documents haven't changed, but we didn't consider something at the point of making that resolution, that's where it's very difficult to change things.
And actually, you would simply tell a councillor, well, actually go and find another councillor, get 3 councillors, you know.
Because the bottom line is there's a point at which you can only go on policies, but I mean, one of the reasons you have committees is that it's not always that clear cut, is it? You might not everybody necessarily is going to have the same interpretation.
Chair, just the last thing I think from my point of view, that the key thing to this is having the ability to review it. So it is useful that district council are formally reviewing this after 6 months because they will have intentions as to how this works and we'll have intentions as to how this process works. But there'll always be unintended consequences, and having that chance to review these as we go along, at worst in 3 months' time. If we're in 2 meetings' time and we realise something's drastically wrong, we should take the opportunity to change. So I think that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I can foresee very easily a scenario under the process that we're agreeing where we recommend refusal on something but don't quite decide that it meets the threshold to call it in, and then a district council wishes to call it in on their own basis, and we're not supporting something despite the fact that we agree with the district councillor that it shouldn't be given.
Well, that'd be a learning process.
Yeah,
And-
but my point is, I think that's a very obvious process.
I'll not put it in the call, it doesn't stop it being called in by 3 councillors.
Realistically, that's no different from historically when we could have said, that's it, we could have said no objection or expressed concern. The district councillor decides to call it. So it's not fundamentally different.
No, but what we're doing by doing that is we're making it harder. I'm not convinced that residents will see the distinction between a recommendation of refusal that we make and a decision not to call it in, personally. But I think we have a resolution that has majority support, so I would it to.
Sorry, just final point. It's a learning experience for everyone, including St Albans. It might be worth, over the 3 months or whatever, finding out how other parish councils are approaching it.
Yeah, there is quite a strong network of correspondence at the moment. And actually, Chair, being on the SADC, you'll hear that firsthand, I think, from colleagues elsewhere.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
So I think we have a resolution. Are we minded to go with the process that we've agreed? All in favour? Lovely. I think if we can bring that back, if we agree at a council meeting outside, we'll bring that back at that future one just to assess how it's going.
Yeah.
Lovely.
The process is now in force. But it's done appear in the Constitution on the St Albans website, which is pretty normal, isn't it? So we did have visibility of what it is we're working to.
Anyway, on to from item 7 to item 6. Applications registered resending 15th, 22nd and 29th of July. starting with item 522-1612 at Wood End School. Observations on this one, Carl?
Yeah, excellent. So I should first off apologise in advance because I won't be as slick as Heather or Mim on this. So you might have the bad end of the deal this evening, but I'm here and they're not. So there you go. I'm doing better than they are at the moment. So with that in mind, Wood End School, this proposal here, would you like me to read out the officer observations? I assume you, how I know you normally
Do
have that.
committee
You
wish
want that?
for Carl to read them out?
I'm not bothered. I mean, I read them all
Yeah.
this
Should
afternoon.
you
I've
say?
read them a couple of times.
I think it is useful if it's something where we're objecting, if you pick out the important points, not really word, but just so that it focuses the discussion.
But
Yeah.
it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah. So on that basis, then the Wood End School application here, we don't see any objection. We've looked at the proximity to neighbours and where the building sits and the changes that they're proposing. Don't see any issue with that. The images on the screen give you a bit of a visual cue to that. So the cross on this first one here is the location of the application. So the next one, that's the other side of it. There's the elevations that are proposed. And this image here, which is taken from the street on the other side from Convenders Close, and you can kind of see that it has no impact from that point of view.
Thank you, Carl. Any comments from councillors on this one? No. Remind to go to the recommendation. All in favour? That's unanimous.
Lovely, thank you.
Item 522-1737 doesn't meet the criteria, so on to 5-2022-1738 Tintern Close. Do you want to just?
Yeah, again, Chair, there's no objection on this one. This is an application that's from the same proposals as previously submitted. At that point, the council had no objections. So on that basis, we are in the same position.
Yeah.
Subject to some information being provided to satisfy Natural England, who have responded with an objection surrounding the proximity of the special area of conservation, which is actually a fairly new issue. We'll recall that we shared with council some time ago that this is something that's been triggered because of development in that particular area.
Okay. Any comments from councillors on this one? No. Remind to go to the recommendation. All in favour? Lovely. 5-2022-1747 at 1 Carpenter's Close. Your observation?
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. So this proposal is to extend the front of the property, single-storey extension running from the garage to the porch area, the side building line and a small first floor extension over the garage. Our observations here have led us to express concern due to the possible loss of amenity on the neighbouring properties, given the two-storey rear element policy 72 of the local plan refers into this one.
Let's we have a look at the pictures.
Yeah, there we go. I've got that on the last one. I told you it wouldn't be slick.
Don't impress us. That's good.
Yeah, so there's the front image. One aerial, another aerial. And that's the images we have for this one.
Lovely. And is it the property on the left we're concerned about?
Yeah.
Any comments from councillors on this one? I can't see any. Are we minded to go to the recommendation? All in favour? I think at this point we also need to work out if we're going to call it in. I'm assuming we're not going to call it in, so do we need a resolution if we're not calling it in? Or
Yeah,
I defer you.
yes. Yeah, this is a brand new process. So yeah, we just do need to resolve whether or not you wish to call this in light of expressing concern.
All in favour of not calling
Well,
it?
hang on a minute. This is where we need to be clear what our criteria are. Because there are material plan considerations which is why we're concerned, but are they of such gravity that we want to call
They
in?
don't, because you never have, and you don't call in on everything you refuse or express concern on.
Okay, but
And you can't, it goes back to the fact you can't have absolute criteria.
well, you have to have some idea, otherwise you're reinventing the wheel each time. what are we looking for that will trigger a call in? I mean,
If the issue that has been raised is a loss of convenience,
yeah,
then we have to decide whether we have to decide whether that is sufficient severity.
Yes. It's going to have an egregious effect
I
on the
think,
amenity.
I think if we thought it was going to be of significant severity for a loss of amenity, we'd recommend
We'd
refusal.
recommend refusal.
Express concern.
so not going to help.
I mean, I can't think of many occasions when you've expressed concern, you want to do a call. Because my logic says if you're that concerned, you'd refuse.
I think it would be very rare, but I think that there would
It
be
exists, but
there
it
would be
rare.
one or two examples why it's worth leaving that option open. But I think
I know in the committees and norms was watched them discussing this. There's a desire to distinguish, as it were, differences between neighbours and something where there's a public interest element, for example, development on Common High Street, as we know, and to filter out from the comment processes that desire things which are simply differences between neighbours. Now, that may or may not be the right approach, I'm not saying it's absolute, but actually our concern here relates to extension at the rear, and that is certainly simply between neighbours. There's no wider public interest. And in terms of whether an officer or committee should decide this, that scale of difference between neighbours is surely something which an officer can decide.
Yes, exactly.
That doesn't vary going to.
Yes, I mean, it's like, I mean, that's bottom line, is if it's something an officer can decide.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
I mean, especially with something like loss of amenity, because there is no definition. It's-
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
broad.
yeah.
We are here, sitting here, looking at a picture like that, it's very difficult for us to make judgment. Whereas I think district council, they go and visit and do site visits, so it would have to be quite a major loss of amenity that was
Yes.
obvious from the photographs that we're looking at. That would then lead us to say.
And that's quite rare. I have seen cases of that. I've seen some when they do an enormous solid running right down
Yeah.
somebody's windows within a foot.
Yeah.
Yes.
So look, if we're not going to recommend calling on this, okay. If we were, I would suggest to do a proper job, we ought to be looking in detail at the plans. We shouldn't make a call in where the only thing we've seen is a couple of photos, because I think it has to be serious. Yeah, we often do anyway. I'd only have to pour over the plan and say, yeah, really, this is a problem. In other words, if we're going to do a call in, there is more work to do.
but for now, for this particular item, are we happy to go with no calling? All in favour of no calling? Thank you.
So just to clarify, did we do two votes then? We did.
Yes,
So we did a vote for the vote, and then do a vote.
because the process requires a second vote once the first vote
that's
is.
fine.
No, it's been a very long week. Led to believe it's still only Tuesday. 5/2022 on 771 at 33 Park Hill.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So within this application, we are recommending refusal based on our observations, and that relates to tree and hedge issues. So the application details state that there are no trees or hedges on the site, and indeed no trees and hedges are impacted by the actual proposal. However, the street scene shows that there is, and that's the basis for the recommended refusal. I would just say that the street scene images from a popular search engine are some years old, but I can confirm that the images on there are the same as you look in person, having driven past. So this is a recommended refusal based on the neighbourhood plan, in particular policy ESD 14 and 74 of the local district plan, which relates to trees also, particularly root protections.
We're not allowed to say the word Google in planning meetings, Carl.
I don't know actually.
You just did.
I think there was a letter of objection on the district website.
I can't recall having seen one.
Perhaps not, perhaps not.
That doesn't mean to say there wasn't one.
Not sure off the top of my head. Have a look if you wish to.
I mean, I think it's a fairly straightforward in terms of,
Yes.
it's just whether there are any other proposals we might like to, not proposals, any other policies that we might
Oh,
like to
no,
add.
this one did. There was a letter, quite a long letter of objection, including overlooking from the balcony on the side. It might just be worth taking that, noting.
Yeah.
There was actually, yes, I read that, there was actually quite a long letter of objection on the district website.
I mean, as I say,
Mainly on the basis of overlooking 32.
I think if we want to add something in, then to strengthen the recommendation, I think we should. But I think we've recommended refusal on no tree report
Yes.
before, so I think the actual recommendation itself won't be affected either way. But it's just, Carl, did you manage to find that sort of objection?
Yes, there is. Yeah, from
32, I think.
32. That's correct. Yeah.
Do we want to add something in about the potential for loss of amenity?
Would you like me to read out what the objection is, just so you've got the content of
So
it?
it's quite a long letter.
So the reasons for it: significant overlooking and loss of privacy for the residents at 32 Park Hill, excessive size and height of the development, overshadowing and loss of sunlight for residents next door, general appearance of the design and visual impact of the proposal, potentially detrimental impact on the highway safety due to reduced on-site parking. The scale of development may exceed the guidelines contained in St Albans supplementary planning advice. So those are the high-level points, and then each of those points is dealt with in more detail, including some images within there.
Can't. So do we want to add in language about potential for overlooking and loss of amenity, which I think is sort of two main items away from that. Size and height as well.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile, Chair, on this one for me just to
Yeah, show the picture.
share this. On.
Yes, I was going to say, I think it might be worth
Just
sharing the photographs that were in the letter of.
All right, okay.
Yeah, they had some photos. of that.
So this first photo is relating to the overlooking.
Speaking of someone with colourblind, please don't use red on brown.
Yeah. Yes.
So this is number 32, and they've got a hot tub. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes,
So
that's the hot tub.
yeah. So the
Yes, it's-
the Juliet balcony that's proposed will be. I think this
Looking
is trying
directly
to.
into their hot tub.
Yeah.
Yes,
It looks like it from that.
looks like it.
There's an order of policies against Juliet balconies up there.
I think quite a lot, Juliet.
Sorry?
Yeah, quite a
Seen
lot.
quite a
Yeah,
lot.
no,
No,
there
but-
used to be a real no.
No, but yes, about how they shouldn't be overlooking.
Yes, oh no, they shouldn't overlook.
Is that two?
So this image is the excessive size. Yeah, I've got the plans here as well.
Yes, it needs its plans.
How can the wall be hanging up in the air?
Yes, because it's,
Roger, I'm not sure it's been done by an artist.
no, because it, yes, because it, well, yes, because it's, the perspective's got a bit peculiar.
There are some more images there.
Yes, I think it's slightly difficult for that to judge.
I am. I'm hogging most of the relevant plans. Past the way, when I say the different.
It looks like there may be a this being. Although I suppose on to get out of the balcony, one could. Recommendation that it should be. Yes, that's concerned. Yes, it's quite not very clear where the balcony is.
Is the balcony the whole that area there?
Well, that's not a Juliet
Describing the
balcony.
Juliet, yeah, so-
Well, that's not a Juliet balcony. It's a roof. Or a roof, or a roof terrace, yes.
I think Juliet balcony, you can just see
I
it.
think you can just see it on the side. I mean,
Right, I think
you
it's just
can't
that.
really find it on the plans.
Is that the Juliet balcony?
No, I think it's to the further to the
It's on
right.
the
See that
side.
kind of the wooden, sorry, that, I think that's the Juliet balcony.
It's very Juliet balcony.
It's quite difficult to work out where the Juliet balcony is.
Yes.
Just
I think that was an example. We recommend refusal to for one reason only. Obviously, officers' time is limited. We don't write an essay of all possible considerations. But given the new call-in process.
Yes.
Suppose we recommend refusal to decide not to do the call-ins, but and then it comes to does later we call it because it just actually doesn't say, oh,
I mean,
it doesn't say anything about that.
I find it
So,
very,
so where we're recommending refusal, it is probably worthwhile if there are major considerations to be sure that we do include them.
Yeah. Though I would note, based on the
Yes.
proposal we've agreed, if we don't recommend a call in, then if a council comes to us and says, would you support a call in, we can't. So,
I find it quite difficult looking at this plans to really work out where the Juliet balcony is. Or indeed, to see where it is, because the Juliet, I can't see anything there that looks like a Juliet balcony.
unless they've changed what a Juliet balcony
Well,
looks like.
yes.
I mean, a Juliet balcony is where there is, you open windows and I assume inwards,
Yes.
and there's a slight.
Yes, there's that little barrier, yes. Yes.
I honestly think that that's
Well,
what
perhaps
that
it
is.
is, but it's,
Can we say recommend refusal on the grounds of the hedges and express concern with regards
Yeah.
to the Juliet balcony?
Concerns were also expressed
Yes.
with
Yeah.
the language we have used
Yes.
previously.
Juliet balcony and potential overlooking a loss of amenity.
Yeah. I think that's, and I think I personally can't quite see where the light, that side of what's illustrated is actually is on these plans, but I think it's worth
Yeah.
just noting it if we're
Yeah.
noting everything else.
I'm looking at the road. No, I think as well, say that if they did lose that hedge and that thing, it would have a material effect on street scene.
Though I'm not sure we can do street scene based on vegetation, given they could remove
No, probably
vegetation
can't do
without
it based
planning.
on vegetation, but it would.
Because there's nothing stopping you taking out a hedge just
That's
like
not-
tomorrow. It's not out there. So yeah, so we've got concerns are also expressed about the Juliet balcony and loss of amenity from potential overlooking and potential loss of amenity from light. Regard. That's language.
I'm just looking at the objection letter. I don't have my own laptop, so I can go through the pages as I want. Obviously, objections are objections, and we don't have to agree with them. But clearly, the objections here are such which were previously as a district councillor I sent these. I might be looking at a call in.
Yes.
Simply because there are so many of them.
I think we have to resolve first and then we'll have to do a discussion about calling.
Yeah. Well, yes, but actually, it's difficult to compartmentalise things completely. Compartmentalise resolutions, but I'm not sure we've compartmentalised the discussion.
I think it's a valid point about potential overlooking.
Yes.
Yeah,
So say the least of it, yes.
regardless of whether it's a box or not.
Not sure that's the thing we should be focusing on.
Sorry, am I focusing on it?
I mean, I think looking at the letter, they've done a very good
Yeah.
structured letter in which they've got in
They've
depth.
gone into detail. Yes.
It's not just I object. So,
It's an excellent use of, I assume, Microsoft Paint.
yeah. So
And they've considered
yeah,
what they call the planning line.
yeah.
Okay, right, so I'll get the first vote out of the way with, which is recommendation of refusal with the additions made in the discussion. All in favour of that? Lovely. Right, then the call-in decision. Do this, do we have a discussion about the call-in, or do we think we just move then to a vote on who wants to call it in and who wouldn't?
I
So
think,
that's my
I
decision.
think, well, as I said previously, I think we need to discuss it because we shouldn't lightly make a call in.
Okay.
And we've had a very much the discussion. I didn't want to have it, but we're actually.
Oh, no, I wasn't that I didn't want to have it. I just thought it would be helpful to have it here rather than.
And I think the key point side here is that when we got the tree report history on the Juliet balcony and overlooking is to decide whether that is something that in fact could, and it's a sort of, not that it's a technical thing, could be left to officer.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, taking some guidance from the objection letter, it's the quantity of things. Does that put it on a different plane, or if analysed separately, or things that it's just the officer does.
I mean, in terms of, they haven't supplied the tree report. If this, am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I don't see that you would allow calling on that basis.
No.
This is a basic.
And I don't think,
Part of the
process.
and I don't think you would on the basis of the balcony, because it's something that I think it's a technical thing that an officer can look at and take a view of whether that balcony is going to overlook or not.
Looking at the plans, I think the balcony, yes, but I think it's wrong to call it Juliet balcony. It's just a balcony.
Yes.
So, am I getting the impression that we don't want to call this in? Will we say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's what, I mean, my view, I've a long time of experience on it, is this is something that would recommend refusal, express concern, but would leave. I don't think it would be necessary to bring it forward. I think it's something that could go, the officers could deal with.
Yes, I think we should perhaps reduce some more of the objection letters. They did refer to Lisbon's planning guidance, for example, on the scale of the development. They're quoting planning guidance in May 2004. What we can't do is just take all of that at face value, because we've got to put a proper job.
Yeah.
But they do look as if they're good points. And so how do we reflect that without having to spend too much time that we don't have, whilst being fair to the resident? Do we have a way of obliquely referring to objections without necessarily endorsing them?
I don't think we've done that in the past. I mean, I suppose we could add some language in.
Well, we cover it if we're saying we're expressing concern about the overlooking from Juliet balcony. I don't think put in words about loss of amenity.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what was resolved within there. So it's the recommend refusal based on the tree side, express concern over the Juliet balcony and the impact on loss of amenity through overlooking, and then the impact on loss of amenity through light loss around the wall as well.
Yeah.
And within that, we would add the relevant planning policies to back that up. I think that's.
Okay, so I think resolve not to call it in. All in favour?
Abstaining.
Okay, well, that's majority.
2-0, sorry.
3 to 0. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't want to put my hands up, but I proposed. 5/2022/1739 does not meet the criteria. Nor do 5/2022/1492 and 1582. So on to 5/2022, 1597 and 29 Barnsley.
Yeah, so the officer observations on this lead us to no objection, providing that there's necessary works are undertaken to the roots of the neighbouring trees. Again, the reference to the neighbourhood plan, ESD 14, policy 74 of the local district plan, which are tree related. It's 5-bedroom detached property, this one, double garage. It's a single story rear and side extensions. No other observations.
Thank you, Town Clerk.
You got the plans there? I'll tell you.
So those ones are the most pertinent ones.
Okay.
There are some other documents as well, if you want to flip through. I should have added at the start of the meeting, the observations that you got here from officers are the observations of your normal planning officers. Yeah, that's why, that's why they're good.
It's a very large extension, isn't it? I think that's a wrong, I was pointing out it's a very large extension. This thing. Oh, I see.
They're making use of the fact that the property is slightly down the slope.
Yes.
That's-
So that's, yeah, because I think one of the key points is that it's not the height, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not going to be higher.
And that road does slope
Yeah,
behind.
that's low.
I'm right in thinking it's the side of the road that's down.
Yeah,
We do have a couple of images here on this one on the screen.
Never had pictures, I always found a bit unnerving because I always think they make them look so much bigger.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Also, it shows you what you've got on your roof, which is never ideal. All in favour of the recommendation? Okay, on to 5/2022, 1727 at 30 Park Avenue North.
Yeah, so thank you. So this one is actually for minor amendments from an original planning permission, largely around brickwork cladding to the front elevation. The officer observations is no objection, subject to the appropriate design and use of materials in the conservation area. And there is some planning policy in relation to that from the neighbourhood plan, ESD 1, ESD 2 and ESD 14. Previously, the town council considered it had no objection in principle. Other than some concerns related to another balcony.
Any comments from councillor Thompson?
I'm just trying to understand it. No objection to appropriate design, use of materials, fair enough. Because this is a proposal for minor amendments. What is the brickwork cladding? We also say that there be no detriment on the protection area. Does that point arise from this new application, or is that really a point on the?
I presume that's the extension of the pool house. Because it says about the corner of the proposed extension to pool house was just on the edge of the root protection area.
Oh, right, okay, fine, yes, okay, fine, so they're both new points, they're new points.
Yeah.
That's fine, okay. That's just, okay.
Everyone else saw that this morning. I do find it quite amusing that we're doing a subject and appropriate design and use of materials when the changes about the materials and the design, but just a quirk of the wording that we use for these things. Any other comments from council? Okay, are we mind to go with the recommendation? All in favour? I think that was unanimous.
Thank you.
2022-16, can't read tonight. 1685 to 137 South Battle Road. Your observation?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So this is a change of use down in Southdown, property formerly a butcher's. Proposal is to change that to Class A5, which takeaway usage. The observations lead us to no objections, provided that there's no detrimental impact on either this locally listed building and conservation area, or no detrimental impacts on neighbouring properties. ESD1, ESD2, the neighbour plan refers in this case, and some local plan references too.
Thank you. Carl, any comments on this
No,
one?
but I think it's a pity there's a shop. That's in Southdown, but I have to say there are actually quite a few takeaways.
Yeah,
There's the fish and chip shop just up the road, Edwards.
Yeah.
Simmons does takeaway, effectively, as well as bakeries. There's the Chinese takeaway and an Indian takeaway on the other side of the road. The Indian restaurant on the other side of the road does takeaways, and TK's Cafe does takeaway.
They're breaching Carl's earlier thing about not needing brand names in the in the committee. No, it's fine.
You can.
I've joked against one.
Well, I'll tell you-
Yes. No,
I mean, I don't think there are any grounds to object. I'm just saying I think it's sad to lose. And it's sad to lose the butchers there, because they've been a butchers there for years and years. Oh,
Yeah.
donkeys years.
But that said, I'd rather see a
That's
business in
I'd
there than
rather,
an empty
well,
shop.
I'd rather see something go in there than it be empty.
Yeah.
I think we do need to correct the observation that there appears to be future takeaway from the road, which actually there are, which also.
We're not voting on the observation, we're voting on the recommendation.
Yeah, Chair, if it helps, I would withdraw that anyway, because personally I don't agree with that there aren't any. So, but it isn't a material. It isn't a
It's
material.
not a material.
But so, yeah, that's my observation on the officer observation is that I don't think it's correct.
It's
As somebody who frequents that takeaway.
if we're going there, I think the co-op might object to us describing their car park as being
Yeah.
parking in the vicinity.
Yeah. I don't think there are any grounds to object to.
Well, just looking at the consider no objection provided, no detriment to the fact that this local listed building, no detriment to the fact neighbouring properties. It's going back to the discussion we had earlier, isn't it our job to make a view on that?
Yes, but I grant it, but I think the point is we're saying,
By saying that, what we're noting is that we would object if there was a detrimental effect. Well, we haven't seen one. If the district officer thinks that there is one, then
it's just pointing it to them that if there is a negative impact on neighbours, then that becomes something that they should be considering.
It looks as if we've hit on an issue, but we've not wanted to take a view on it.
Well, I suppose it depends how you look at it. You could argue that if you need to demonstrate that you have taken cognizance of the fact that it's a conservation area.
We have turned down in the past. It was going to be a pizza place, still is a pizza place actually, isn't it? Used to be on the main bit of the high street.
They are very
yeah.
fast quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then on the other side, there was going to be a pizza place, and there is now. And we turned it down because the flu was opening up near the flat above.
But it does note in this that the flu runs not in a way that would. Because I looked at that.
No, it won't, because in fact, if you can't see this here, but if see there's a little break between Simmons and I think he's a Barbers. And because there are flats in that, of that Simmons and the garages, and then you go on to, and there is in fact behind Jellies and whatnot, there's a sort of, I don't know what to call it, a yard or whatever you want to call it. There is an area behind of sort of what, I don't know, work area, whatever you want to call it. Yes.
I think Tilly's meets extended out the back actually.
Yes, they do. They extend out the back, and then there's also some vehicle parking out the back as well, as you can see.
There is a flat upstairs, but as I say, the flue will expand beyond any window.
But it will be, yes,
It goes up to where the chimney is, so
yes,
it's sort of really just a new chimney.
yes.
Slightly less architecturally pleasant chimney, but a chimney nonetheless.
Yeah, that's the back extension you referred to.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's actually in the one on the high street, the pizza place, I was walking on there the other day and I thought, is that what smell? And I realised it was the pizza place.
And what is important here, and I don't know whether it's going in the application, is what we're going to do with fascia and advertising, because that's how you can really spoil a building.
There's no planning it.
But there's no planning application in respect of that. You can only take decisions on what's in front of you.
Yeah.
You can't take.
So I was looking to see if there was an application to change of use. Okay.
They'll have to bring a separate application in for when they actually want to do anything with it.
Fine. Okay, well, that gives some control. That's good.
That said, I think there have been instances recently where people have started doing the work before they put in the planning application on signage and things.
Yeah.
Is it a particular common high street brand that pizza?
I haven't heard.
I assume they have a brand in
I think there already are both of the major ones that I would consider.
John's and
Well,
Domino's.
this is an applicant by a. It's an applicant by
No,
the.
it's by the owner.
300, yes. It's more speculative.
Well, they may have decided to open a pizza business. They may just, they own a building and they want to sell pizzas.
They own buildings.
Well, they own buildings. Yes, they own most of the building, a lot of the building in Southport.
But my point is, we can't speculate. on
We
what
can't speculate.
I wouldn't-
Okay, are we minded to go with the recommendations set out? I'm all in favour of that recommendation. 5/2022/1790 does not meet the criteria. So on to 5/2022/1765, 14 Carpenters Close. I'll give you back the plans.
Yeah, thank you, sorry.
Your observations.
Yeah, so I will read this, these observations in full. You'll see from this application, there's been a number of applications in relation to this property. This particular application shows proposals for an increase to the first floor front elevation over the existing garage in order to extend the bedroom area. A small increase to the porch at the front of the property and a single-storey side extension, which runs along the boundary of the property with number 16 Carpenters Close, to incorporate a new utility room. The proposal also includes a single-storey rear extension measuring 3.5 metres in depth, and above it a two-storey rear extension running on the boundary of number 12 Carpenters Close, which then decreases in size to allow for the extension of another rear bedroom by 1.5 metres, which is sited away from the neighbouring property. There's no increase in bedroom accommodation, therefore no changes to parking provision, no trees appear to be affected. Having taken those observations, this is a recommend refusal to be considered based on the overdevelopment of the site in terms of size and scale, which could lead to detrimental impacts on both neighbouring properties and the street scene. There's neighbourhood plan policies ESD1, ESD2 apply, and also policy 69 and 72 of the local plan. We've got the plans here should you wish to have a look at those.
Not really at all.
No.
It's all the plans.
Yes, I had to look online, they're
Yeah.
a bit sketchy.
Sketchy would be good. We might have another one in there. The sketch.
What's the effect on the site? Is it filling the site or is it from just? It probably is, looking at the images.
Was it?
Yeah, so-
The block plan,
Yes,
yes,
it's certainly filling the way.
certainly from the webs, yes.
Yeah.
Entirely sure that the house is big, sorry, the plot is big enough for the house. Not the proposed house, the current houses. Yes.
I mean, not if it's, they are filling the width of the
Hmm.
site outgoing. Relative to the layout of the street. As far as the neighbouring properties, it's a big extension.
And I mean, that presumably the house, that's locality or similar design,
Yes.
we need to lose that uniformity.
Yes, fine, with question about it's filling.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly is.
Yes.
Might worry about terracing, but
Well, yes, I think that is, yes, I think that's. I think that's a very real. I have to get over this house and this house.
so I think you might want to write some language in about that. Just so that there's something in there that covers it. Concern about potential terracing effect on. We usually have some very good wording here, Carl, but we'll leave you to fill in the specifics after the.
Heather will provide that very useful wording once I've briefed them.
Because you could add in, if you have to have the streets in, including possible terracing, then
Something on those
something
sides.
along those.
We have to be a little bit flexible today with the specifics. No offense, Phil.
No offense taken.
Any other comments from council on this one? No.
Sorry, nothing more to say.
Okay, all in favour of the recommendation? Lovely, and then we have to have our second discussion on whether or not to call it in. Personally, I think, given some of the fact that it is quite so big on the plot, I would be minded to call this in. As my personal vote, but I'll open the floor to councillor comments on it. Any comments?
I would certainly agree if it were in a conservation area. Take it out, because it isn't, but yeah, I think it depends what the criteria is supposed to be. I know, every time I say that, I'm met with, you can't write it down, but you've got to have some idea of what
You're
it
not
is.
going to get something clear cut criteria. It won't happen because it's just not practical. You can't do it, and it would be so prescriptive. And if you do, you immediately make it prescriptive.
If it was a national planning policy, that would be a different matter to if it's a district council one. Not least because of the district council
try to tie parishes' hands to what they
If
can
you write
can't
down
call in, it
criteria.
becomes a problem.
But then you have to find, you get endless ones that don't meet the criteria, but which need to be called in.
And as I say, you end up having an argument with parishes about what that criteria should look like. I think the point of it being open-ended is it gives us the opportunity to look at each one as a case.
I mean, the fact that it's been a history of refusals would suggest that in any case, the officers will have a very close look at it and be very well aware of the issues.
We don't know if that was a refusal at committee or a refusal at,
We don't know which it was, no.
so it could well be that it has been refused at committee loads of times, but not necessarily by officers.
What's been on appeal?
Which well,
Yeah,
yes, but they partially won it, and then it's gone back since then and was refused, and it in 2017, I don't see that partial appeal that was the, well, in 2016, then there's another application in 2017, which was refused.
Clearly, there is a history.
Yes.
And clearly, the planning officer looking at this, we'll look at that history. And we'll look particularly carefully at what the inspector said on the appeal of the not allowed, the what was allowed. And that gives the officer quite a good framework. And having thought about it, my own view is we don't need that to impose that it goes to the committee. Different if it's on the high street or something, but it's not.
again, though, I would point out that we're not imposing it because we're not only people with the same that goes there. But if we don't call it in, there is less opportunity for the district councillors to do so without it causing them further sort of difficulties in finding another district council to do it. So this is partly why I think our process should be more, not to use the word in its capital letter sense, but more liberal with what we call in, because I think if we leave those options open, district councillors then have an option that they don't necessarily have if we don't call it in.
Yes, it's a tricky one on call-ins because
I mean, I suppose what you want to happen is the district councillors to look and see
Yes.
what was the opinion of the
Yes.
town council.
Yeah.
And so therefore, with the ones that we feel strongly about,
then we can resolve.
Yeah.
The call-in, and then they could take a view that I don't think it's appropriate.
So I don't want to retread the argument from earlier, but I think in the context of ones where we do think that there's a reason to refuse it that's significant, I think we should be calling it in purely on the basis that it makes it easier then if the district councils agree with us.
Yeah.
Because we can't, if we say no, we can't go back to this and agree with the district councillors if they want to call it in.
Because interestingly, I presume the new system is to reduce the number of call-ins. I personally feel it's going to do the opposite,
But that isn't our,
which is why they
that's not the problem.
To think that's going to be the result.
In which case, when it goes for review, we might well see the process change further.
Yes,
But
anyway, that's by the by. I mean, I don't feel strongly either way on this one, so I'd go with it. My personal view.
borderline.
Yes, I think it's borderline.
And clearly, if you're here in one capacity, as a member of this committee, from town council, we do have another capacity, and strictly speaking, they're separate. But the whole point of this three-tiered process for callings now is that it does bring together the different tiers, the parish council, the district councillors. So I don't think you could be criticised if you were sitting there thinking, well, I'm going to call it in if they don't. I think you'd be free to say so. Equally, if you're thinking, I don't care what they're going to do, I don't know what to call it. I don't think you'd be criticised for saying that,
No,
and you couldn't be criticised for not having made up your mind either.
no.
So, you know.
Well, I suppose I don't mind whether it's appalling or not. I suppose my main view is that this is the opportunity for the town council to assert its role, its authority, its position in planning. And we choose it and we use it carefully, but because we use it carefully, and it gives it more. It gives us.
You shouldn't overuse it, that's
Yeah,
true,
yeah.
absolutely, yeah, agreed, yeah.
I will put it to a vote. So I think at this point, that's the only way we're going to get a resolution on this.
Yeah.
All in favour of recalling? All against recalling? Okay, no call.
Yeah, oh yes, that's true.
5/2022/1622 does not meet the criteria, so on to 5/2022/1775 at 2 Shakespeare Road.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this one, we are recommending refusal based on insufficient parking provision on the site for the host dwelling and the additional habitable accommodation that's essentially in the converted barn out the back, policies 40 and 72. Bear with me 1 second. Seamlessly into the images of the street scene there. Apologies for that, I'm sure what happened. It's about seamless as I get this evening, I think. So this is the front of the property.
The edge.
Yeah, the overhead of the property. This image here is particularly important. Sorry, I was just the blurred image there. I don't think it's particularly helpful. The yellow arrow is pointing to the converted barn out the back. So the concern we have with this is creating a new habitable accommodation and parking provision is already a concern, and even more so in this case.
It's also, but I couldn't work out because it's not at all clear, is it, whether this conversion is, as it says, is whether it's for a property to be sold or additional living space or whatever, or a granny annex. But only one of the things is, apart from the parking, is the access.
But also, I think there's a significant concern if it is a separate dwelling or going to a separate dwelling, but the means of those. But isn't a big garden?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Please.
The first barn is going to have a living room and the kitchen,
It's
a bathroom,
it's
and a
huge.
bedroom.
In other words, it's small.
Some other diagrams there if you want them.
I should say, I wasn't aware there were any barns and gardens and all.
But it's not going to be, it's going to be 2 story, it's not going to be bungalow.
No, it's
Bedroom's going to be at the top.
it's got a roof bedroom.
But I'm wondering whether it's another size, not thing.
Well, yes, exactly.
Yes.
Just whether it's the. And also, not, That's what I'm just wondering about the appearance. And the conservation area.
No, this is no first. This is the new.
It's not got,
It's a distant garden floor. That's the first floor. You've got a bedroom.
and I mean, it's not clear. I mean, one sort of assumes it's going to be, if it isn't some granny annex or something, because there's no. Well, there wouldn't be any amenity space with that one.
Well, no, because they haven't subdivided.
No,
So at some point, if they're going to make it a separate dwelling, they have to subdivide the plot.
no.
Well, if they're sort of freehold, yes, but if it's simply let it out, then you do what they want.
Is this locally listed?
It's in conservation area. I'm not sure. Is the house locally listed?
I think the house is the barn, presumably, isn't.
No, the barn conversion affects the local listed house.
I mean, I would have thought that would be why it's locally listed, it's because of the barn in the back.
I think it's because it's. I think it's because it's one of the Victorian houses along in that area.
So the houses in the area are in the conservation area.
Yeah.
But that one particular one is locally listed, or they're all locally
I
listed?
think they're probably all locally. I think all the Victorian wooden houses down there are listed.
You can check, but
I
that's
think generally, I think they are. I think they are in most of that conservation area. The older houses, I think, I think all listed.
That's my understanding.
Yes,
from
my understanding is
my
they're all
brief
listed.
experience.
And you need to look at what the bit at the side is, whether that's going to fit in with the.
don't want roof lights as well.
Well, yes, with roof lights, but not in the listed building. No.
Just to say, should I bring that up?
Yeah, so ahead of the officer observation has been put onto paper, the team generally produce their notes. The notes on this one are actually far more extensive than what is set out in the recommended refusal. So the parking is just set out in recommended refusal, but the other things that have been commented on in these observations on this page is there's no heritage statement submitted, which is required under ESD B2 of the Parkland Neighbour Plan for all locally listed buildings. So that's a significant issue. There's also notes on here around overdevelopment as well, and light impact in the conservation area, as well as insufficient parking. I'm not quite sure how they haven't made their way onto the recommendation, but in my view, having read this and listened to what I've said so far, I think those are additional points that need to be covered up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think. I also think it's worth making the point, and I know that this isn't something necessarily that planning can pick up, but if this is intended to be used as a separate dwelling, that we have concerns about the amenity space that it would have.
I'm also looking at the looking at that, it's the proposed front elevation, somewhat concerned with that. It's an extension of a listed building. It's not exactly in keeping, is it?
It's not, no.
It's definitely very unkeeping.
And that's the effect on the streets, isn't it?
Yes. It's inappropriate design for a listed building, and that's actually affecting street scene and listed buildings in the conservation area.
No.
That little wooden fence isn't doing a great deal to
Well,
disguise it.
but neither is the
Yeah,
building affected,
well, because it's wider than the house.
and in the wrong materials apparently. It's going to do it should be in brick.
Yeah. It wouldn't look terrible in brick, to be fair. I mean, I would have less objection.
I'd have less objection to it if it had been shown in brick.
Yeah.
Which it should be, because you obviously need to use correct materials.
Also, can you tell me the site plans not you, Carl, sorry. Too many U's. in this. So that's saying that's the rear plan, which has got windows in it. But that looks to me to be right up against the boundary at the back.
It's, yes, it is.
So that rear window,
Wait a minute, where are you? That rear window?
so this is the rear elevation of the proposed.
Yeah.
That's a window.
That's, this is the ground floor. That-
Yeah,
that's on
but
the-
this is the barn.
Is it?
But it looks to me like the
No, I
barn.
don't think it
No, I
is.
think it's the back.
No,
of
it's
the
the back of the, yeah, it's the back,
That's the house.
it's the extension, back of the house.
Isn't it?
Yes.
But on the front view,
Yeah,
it's,
it's there, but yes.
oh, it is. Sorry, I did take that back. Sorry, it's very confusing because on the front one you can see the barn, but on the back one
Yes.
it looked like it was the barn, but it isn't. There is no rear of the barn though, which is. Sorry.
Yes, I mean, the rear of the barn is literally just, so,
Sorry.
so,
Walking into things. Oh no, that is the rear.
so, yeah, that's, but the rear of the barn is simply a brick wall.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I've misread the document.
It's not glass, isn't it?
That's an awful lot of plastering, it's good and green.
I think we might be making that comment as well.
We have 1, 2 to 13 units.
Materials aren't in keeping.
No, all listed.
All the old ones do.
For that dashed outline of adjacent first floor, but that's also effectively. Of projections.
Yeah, so I think just to recap where I think we got to on that one. So there is the insufficient parking policy reference, then there is the reference that we'll make around lack of heritage statement in the SD2, its effects or adverse impact on the street scene, and then there's queries around the materials not in keeping, particular glass. And then there was a question mark that you raised, Chair, around whether you wanted to put in concerns if this was to be proposed as a separate dwelling, if you wanted to mention that. So
Yeah, I think we should just mention that other than maybe.
Because although it's, yes, because it says about converting it into a dwelling, but doesn't say.
Yeah.
Why,
I looked at planning application form, it doesn't.
and it doesn't say why.
I also think we should comment on the fact that it's an open development.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if you said that.
no, I didn't just about to get it in.
And also, there's the effect on local listed buildings. So
Yeah.
it's a heritage like this, in a conservation
Yes,
area.
yes, inappropriate design for a locally listed building within the conservation
I
area.
think, appropriate design and mass, isn't it?
That's, yes,
Of a locally listed building being a heritage asset in the conservation area.
within the conservation area.
Okay, so you happy to resolve on that basis?
Yeah,
It's not going to do it.
obviously, obviously Heather will pull together, or whichever planning officer is pulling this together, will pull together the proper wording, but we have the, encompassing all the things that you've just mentioned, are we happy to go with that as a recommendation of refusal, all in favour?
Yeah.
Lovely. Now, second question, call-in, I think seems fairly obvious to me that this one should be, given it's a listed building.
I can certainly be minded that this one should be called in.
Yeah.
In that case, I shall put it straight to a vote, call in, all in favour? Lovely. Let's think you're voting then, Rebecca.
No.
No, we need to look to see when the final date for calling is on this one.
Yeah.
28 days from the date of the 2 days.
Yeah.
It's not clear, fundamentally clear to the reader of the agenda which date each property appeared on the list. I have suggested we should try to clarify that. So there's just one long list of 3
Yes, I think
lists.
it's one on this,
But
so,
it'd be better if
and
it's
it's
3
not
lists.
material, it's at the beginning of the.
It'd be better if it's 3 lists, then
Yeah.
you can see what our call-in date is.
But presumably in
most circumstances, given it's the planning officers that are putting this together, they will know when.
If we do not get it, if we and the other two councillors are not going to be involved yesterday, yes, of course.
Yes, yes, it's outside the cooling period.
Yeah, get it.
As
So it's nothing to do with the planning officers, they're
Yes.
not there to help. We have to get it right ourselves.
No, I meant our planning officers rather than.
Yeah.
Yes,
Is it, there's a possibility that the closing date is this Friday?
Yeah.
Hopefully not,
Yes.
but what do you think about that possibility?
So our process that we agreed earlier is that immediately after a meeting, i.e. first thing tomorrow morning, this will be initiated.
very unlikely it'll be within 24 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, I will double check that.
It's usually, but not strictly, usually aligned with the Comet's closing date, which is the 20th of August. That's not sacrosanct, that's usually, okay. If that is the case and clear, we've got 10 days. But Friday, not this week, but next week.
That's one for you to take away for a calling, Carl.
Yep, thank you.
Lovely. 5/2022/1866 does not meet the criteria. 5/2022/1862 does, but I'm told that formal response will be presented by the town council separately. I'm assuming that's still under delegated authority between you and.
Yeah, it's just worth clarifying on this one. So this isn't, because there has been some confusion this week on this one. So this isn't actually a planning application, it's something different. It's a technical application around scoping opinion. Specifically, when a major development comes forward, the developer is required to carry out an environmental impact assessment. And the scoping opinion is normally requested of the district council in advance, which basically says, these are the things that we think we need to produce for the environmental impact assessment. Do you agree? Are we missing anything?
Yeah.
So for that reason, this isn't something that the town council will comment on in terms of what it thinks of the proposal. But what we will be doing is submitting a response to the scoping opinion. That will be drafted and dealt with outside of committee, but will be shared in draft form with all councillors. It will essentially say, we know what this is and we know this is an application, and if and when it becomes an application, the town council as custodians of the Harpenden and Neighbourhood Plan will be considering this and having a view. In the meantime, we notice a scoping opinion. These are the things that we would expect to see, and it will be the things that are referenced in the neighbourhood plan. So that's the reason why it's not on here, because it isn't actually a planning application to consider in that sense.
Lovely. 5/2022/1838 Coleswood Road. Now, I think, having looked at this is one we've had before on a very similar proposal. But I will leave it to you.
Yeah, that is correct. So this one has been around previously, and hasn't gone anywhere. The observations on this one lead to a recommend refusal. So essentially, despite the applicant addressing some of the issues, really the cramped addition to the street scene is really odd to the surrounding area. It's the observation we've got here. So scale, massing, design, cramped layout, lack of off-street parking. These are the issues that the committee have previously had, and the views of officers here that they haven't really been able to come and what's in front of you. This is the front view here. Top view here. Of course, we've got the designs here.
I think it's a site is slightly generous.
Yeah.
It's a very small, narrow.
Is really this area of the garage that you've got in front of you, you see on the screen.
Am I right in saying that this time, like last time, that it leaves number 6 with no parking of its own? I know that we had that before, but this is the parking for number 6.
Yeah. So that eradicates that completely.
Which is
Yeah.
a pretty big issue on Cotswold Road.
Well, there isn't any parking.
There isn't
on
a parking
Cotswold
on
Road.
Cotswold Road.
It's already mostly on
And
the
it's
street.
already,
Ridiculous.
yes.
Yeah, so it is a more modest proposal. Although it doesn't really deal with the issues.
Well, there's a party wall
Yes, they'll be building up the
around them.
And it's all one proposal, it's still called price it off, isn't it?
they actually unveil some bike pots, right? Some bike pots that are slightly bigger than that.
Yeah, but equally with the court and pipe pots.
The reference it's passion. Yes, no, I think my big concern is much than anything else. I think it's not suitable for obvious reasons, but I think my big concern as well is the impact that it would have on number 6 by losing
Yes.
parking.
Which, as we've said, is Coleswood Road is, that seems,
That is a significant impact
Yes.
on a property that is, one of the last.
I've not quite understood where it is. I mean,
it's opposite,
I know of course the road is, but number 6 is the house with a cross, isn't it?
no, so number 6 is, I think it's a dog leg, and number 6 is to the right, round the corner. Because this is on, Kingcroft. So the road goes like, Coleswood Road goes like this, Kingcroft comes off it like this, and I'm pretty sure number 6 has a garden that goes like that with the garage here.
Yes, okay.
Am I right?
Therefore, that number 6 is the house with the cross.
Well, it could well be. My point is, it's round the corner rather than behind.
Yeah. Well, okay, so what, if you're going back to the other image, what is that that's behind then, that's part of the cross?
So the cross here, I think, is the just showing plot of where
Okay.
the development's proposed in that area.
So reconciling with that, surely that is number 6, wasn't it?
Yeah, it may well be. My point was it's frontage is round the corner.
Yeah. So, well, that was right.
You get the overhead on it.
Yeah.
Yes, I know that, I've never quite worked out what you're supposed to do with one of the
Right,
half
so-
parking spaces.
You get that.
You need a very strong second source.
That's that property there.
And so
Into a car.
carriage is there,
Yeah.
and then it would be whichever the first two houses. So I think it is this one, isn't it? It's set back.
Okay, that makes sense then. Right, okay. Just share the screen.
But yeah, it's, the frontage is on Coleswood Robinson. So yeah, so that's the property there.
So this is the property. So whether that X marked out where the development was or was marking out the property, actually probably in sensible terms, whoever was marking out that property.
Mm.
So this is the property, and then the garage is from the other angle there.
Yes, so it is, that's all.
So what are they going to do about parking?
They're not,
They're not.
as far as I can tell,
Oh,
unless I missed
something
something.
for hotel then, do they?
Well, they've got rentals there, they've got,
But presumably the parking there is for new development, not for the existing house.
It's not only one space, not 1.5.
the parking, yes, it's the development.
So what
Yes.
happens with parking for the existing house? Because they're giving up their parking space.
Proposal seeks to create a modest single dwelling from an underutilised site.
Then can't, and then, well, I've looked up and then on the deadline on Shakespeare Road, next
19.
Friday, next, yes.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, I was just going to say as well, yeah. That gives us a bit of time. No, a bit, yeah.
Won't feel happy.
Tomorrow.
So do I understand correctly then, the development is going to be going on to
Kingcroft, yeah.
Kingcroft, but it's 6 Coleswood, which is putting in the planning application.
Yes.
Yeah,
And 6 Coleswood is going to lose its parking space.
Yeah.
Not,
Which is not at front, it's at its side, yes.
yes. So Therefore, so, oh, right, so Coleswood is going to be losing its parking space and have no parking.
As far as I can tell from the plans and what's been proposed previously.
So it's not the property that's built that is losing its parking or has no parking space, it's Coleswood.
Which I think is being done to try and get the planning on the new building itself is fine.
In fact, yeah. Yes.
But yeah, so it's where that car is, it's where they're putting the house.
So,
Yeah, so I think not actually clear what people they've addressed, to be honest. But in any case, I think I'd be tempted to be a bit stronger in our recommendation. I think it's clearly a different.
we've got to go on further about why it fits in with policies.
Yeah, I think it's clearly an overdevelopment and it's clearly going to have a negative impact on number 6 by view of the fact that number 6 is losing, as far as we can tell, its only parking spaces. It's got a garage. Whether or not they park there is slightly incidental. Because that's not a planning consideration. Yeah, I think we should beef up the wording slightly to reflect.
They're not going to park there, good luck with where they are going to park.
I just wonder whether the previous wording that the council have used to recommend refusal is still relevant. So, as well as what we've mentioned there previously, we said with regards to recommend refusal with regards to overdevelopment of the site in terms of size, scale, lack of sufficient amenity space, and the effect on the street scene regarding the terracing effect. Also expressed concern regards to loss of parking to number 6 and the surrounding roads where there are already parking issues. This would make the issue worse.
Yeah.
Policies ESD to refer, and then also
The only thing they've actually sorted from that is the amenity space, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So I think if we remove those words, because fair play to them, they have sorted out the amenity space. Everything else still stands. Okay. Lovely. Not lovely. Any additional comments from councillors? No? You mind just go with that recommendation? All in favour? Lovely. Now, I personally would be minded to call this in, given, and the fact that it is so much of an overdevelopment for me, but open to discussion. Any comments from councillors on whether it should be called in?
I would distinguish it from Shakespeare Road, which is a conservation area. It's building. I would say this is on a plan with the other one we looked at, the address, where we did recommend a refusal. We decided didn't there to call in. My personal reasons, I think this is well within the competence of the officer. It's got a history. The loss of parking for the existing house is just so obviously inappropriate. I personally don't see the need to take it to the committee.
But just to pick up on that, if it's so obviously inappropriate and the officer was minded to accept it, which is the only reason why it would end up in front of the committee, isn't it our duty to refer to the planning committee things which are so obviously inappropriate in the event that they get approved by officers?
That's not historically that callings of work, no.
But I think we're more focused on things which are borderline, which require judgment. elected councillors, whereas something which is just so obviously that doesn't meet the criteria, you don't need to do that.
What's the better way of putting it? Not there to say, well, we not to try and do its call-ins are when you feel it is appropriate that a committee of councillors discuss. And it's either because conservation area is very, or whatever, it's something that needs to be, if you like, closely looked at, monitored and protected, or it can be where there is a call-in where it is actually not an absolutely clear-cut decision, and you feel it, and it needs to be discussed.
Elected councillors should take the responsibility.
Where it's a sort of borderline one.
Yeah, so I really don't agree on that. Too.
That's fair enough. I just think if this gets through
Yeah, I
and
can
we
see your
didn't call it
point.
in,
I-
then
yeah,
residents will rightly think that we
Yeah.
didn't do our jobs.
No, it won't, because that isn't our job.
But if it's so obviously inappropriate that it shouldn't be agreed
but
and
then-
it gets agreed,
but that's-
then
That's why St John's applies planning officers to do with the obvious.
fine. If that's the position, then fine. I just think we're
I think
elected.
you're making a good point.
Um,
I think it's a fair point, but I think it's what makes it quite difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes,
right, well, I'll put it to a vote.
because the problem is call-ins are not meant to be predicated on basically, because just to be very, I'm going to be very boring and say planning is quasi-statutory, it's based on rules.
Yeah.
And it's not something that if a resident came and asked you to do a call-in, one of the problems is you feel obliged to do so, but you shouldn't do a call-in unless you feel there are reasons to do so.
Yeah, and the difference that I have is that I think that if it is so obvious that if it was approved that would be a wrong decision, then I think that's exactly the sort of thing that we're here to fix.
Mm.
That's why you have councillors rather than just letting officers
Yes.
in Whitehall decide planning applications. But I'll put it to a vote and we will
I
go
think this
from
is
there.
a pretty borderline.
So all in favour of calling it in? All in favour of not calling it in?
See your point though. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I see your point.
But I think, because I see what you're saying. You're saying that if the council officer gives it an approval.
Yeah.
I mean,
Which is the whole point of
Yeah,
the new
residents
process.
say
Yeah.
to call
That
it.
is the entire.
Although it's not, but remember, it is not just down to us about whether there's a cause. I mean, if a
Which is the
resident-
point that I
that's
made
If a
earlier.
resident really takes no exception, usually they get onto their district council.
But now that we've made this recommendation, it makes it significantly harder for the district councillor to get that call in done because we can't support it. Because, and we are one of the three bodies that can support it.
It's a tricky one because you can't, I mean, we can't.
But the point is that the difference between the current system and the previous system is that whereas with the previous system, a district councillor could request a call in. Now, we have an ability to say yes or no, but the point is we have an ability to say no, which makes it harder for district councillors to do their job, which is what we're doing with some of these.
But then at the same time, you're in danger of calling everything in because I think, because your point is that you call in borderline.
Yeah.
And your point is that you call in something because it is so obviously wrong or so obviously inappropriate development, and that you want to assert that.
Yeah.
Point.
And the broader point in terms of democratic oversight that I would make is we elect district councillors to decide specifically what should be called in and what not. And I think our job, personally, I think our job as a town council planning committee is to give the option to district councillors to call things in, but that's not a decision. We've had this discussion. I won't belabor the discussion.
Yeah, the planning process ticks over the planning officers. Councillors only intervene when there's a reason to do so.
Yes, and my point is,
we hear time to trust that the officer will get this one right. It's so obvious. Therefore, we don't have a reason to intervene.
and if government bodies got something right every time it seemed like it was obvious, we wouldn't need to have any elected representatives at all.
Whichever it was, when there was that long objection. one of the reasons why it's pretty important to check if there are any letters of objection.
Yeah.
On the district website.
So we've done that before.
I'll move us on
Yeah.
to 5/2022/1823 for a
Sorry,
hatching.
that was a very bad question from Rosemary. Have we checked if there are objections on comments?
Yes, I have.
Oh,
I've been through all of them.
For a hatching green close. We have no drawings available, Carl.
Yeah, so there must have been a glitch available this one because the drawings came out very, very late. So at the point of issuing the summons, we had no drawings in order to make observations. They are on there now. They appeared a couple of days ago. There's two ways of dealing with this. One is we can get them all up now and consider them. Two, we can deal with them under an urgent item under our standing orders. Essentially, once Heather comes back, we will consider them, send the view round to the committee, see if we can get agreement on that view, and then sign it off under urgent business, or we can get them all up now, should you wish to.
What's the opinion of the committee? Would we like to have Heather's observations before we make a decision on this one?
There's no history.
No history. I have looked at it. Rosemary's going to look at it. So we're trying to get on with it. Especially it's theoretically, you might want to do a call in which case it's limited.
Do we know if this is in conservation area? I suspect it might be in hatching green.
Actually, really close, the ones that's the other side of the road from.
Yeah.
It's, the other opposite.
Yes.
Horses.
It's
that
an obvious
side.
side, yeah.
Yes, I'm not sure if that side, but I'm not sure if Hatching Green close with.
Some are there.
Some are.
These are modern. I'm not
Some
sure.
are, but some are modern.
This is modern.
Doesn't necessarily preclude it being in
Yeah.
conservation.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't, I
don't-
well, I'm not sure on that.
Some of them down there are green belt. I don't think hatching green closes, but
No. I mean, the other side of the road is conservation area,
That is.
yes.
Oh, hang on a minute. Half of it is, half of it isn't. How's that? I think it is. I think it's that, but it is just in.
It's
on the
just,
boundary.
yeah.
as I say,
It's that. It's that one.
yeah, I did think it might be. I mean, that is a very strange conservation area boundary.
It's probably to do with the edge of the houses, I guess.
Or if they were originally back gardens of the houses that were in the
Yes, I
conservation
think
area,
that's
and therefore they're in it.
because there's been quite
legacy.
a lot of
Yeah.
large issues. I mean, there's one massive house been built there. So.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of developments happening. Is Foray the one that we had quite recently?
Yeah, what would you like me to get up on the screen?
If we just get plans and what there is existing to start with. Post even what there is existing.
Just in the lap of the planning portal download speed at the moment. So I'm
Yes, it's very, very slow.
You start
apologise.
downloading it by Christmas, we might have got it on.
I might finish going
If
through all
you
this afternoon.
download all documents, they come down as a zip file. It can be a bit quicker.
These are the diagrams. Got so front elevation existing.
Love technology, Carl.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't help. I only was aware that these diagrams weren't there about 2 hours ago, so.
Look like an enormous tree.
Big property anyway.
No idea, no.
Bungalow.
Looks like a bungalow there. Well,
See if I can get a street scene.
Sorry. But the remnants of hay fever season.
It's a big extension.
You won't get, they won't have gotten a fan down. Oh, they did.
It has such a small frontage, you won't be able to see it.
Yeah, I don't think I can spot it on one of those. The relative who
that is the
It's existing.
Yeah.
The ground floor one, which is a bungalow. Suggests it's there upstairs, I don't know, upstairs and upstairs, it's a bungalow. So what they're doing to it is obviously quite extensive.
they're making it 2-story.
Yeah, I think they're adding
Story side and rear.
it's down there.
we've done this bit, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is quite a big.
Reasonable sized plot with a bungalow on it.
There's two bungalows on there, isn't there?
Yes.
No,
Like bungalows.
what's that, a garage?
So this first bit here's a garage,
Yeah.
and then there's a bungalow behind it, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there's another one down there, I believe.
Because,
Oh,
yes, I mean, there used to be a lot of bungalows, Patch Green. I think some of them have already been extended, haven't they, into them?
that's not
That should be.
how it's shown on the plot. Oh, I see, yes it is.
Yes.
Yes, it is, yes. There's one access for two properties, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's this one, this is the area actually, this might help, mightn't it?
That,
I think this was quite recent or something.
doesn't look like it.
Or is it this one?
Yeah,
That says 4.
yeah, for you suggest that's an infill.
At the bottom,
That's
yeah.
the one's
Oh,
quite
we've
big.
got a site location, that might help. Is there a site location on Cinderfish?
Yeah, there is a, it's. Yeah. That, I don't think of the fence, I think that's just a property ownership boundary. So you go in and there are two bungalows.
Yeah, okay. So it's these two properties here then.
Yes,
Yeah. But it's the one,
It's this bottom left
Is
one,
that-
is it? What's yours then?
oh, what number are we dealing with?
Warren.
4A,
6.
4A.
Oh, no, it was 4A, sorry, 4A.
Jesus, these places, they just renumbered away.
Okay, 4A is it where the top one?
The
This
top
one.
That one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
With a separate garage.
Mhm.
The drawings make it look like they're drawing the garage.
There's a bungalow,
Mm-hmm.
which is becoming a house.
It's the one on the right.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, cool.
There's the house.
Yeah, so that's the proposed comparison to the street scene you just saw.
If the,
The documents or the drawings have only come up recently within the last couple of hours. Are the neighbours being in a position to it's an objection?
Turn up on Friday, I think they were, I think everyone's on Friday.
time,
No.
No,
particularly if they could be on holiday.
Yeah, exactly.
there's no comments on that at the moment.
When's the closing date?
So the official comment date is by the 10th of September.
But that's triggered by the plans going up, but the calling period is different.
It's shorter than that, yeah.
Depends when it went on the list.
So it's the last one, so it's 26th of August.
Still hasn't another meeting.
No,
But which is a defect in the system, that the plans go on late, they give the public longer,
Yeah.
and they don't give a call in, extend the call in. So
Yeah. it's crazy. Isn't it?
Because we could give a comment at our next meeting, we can't call it in.
So the calling period used to be 21 days, by 28. And they should take up one councillor.
Oh, there we go.
The only thing I proposed before council and it went through, so. It aligns with public comments normally.
So, do we have a view? Anyone want to?
Well, I suppose I would want to have an understanding what the neighbours consider this development, the impact of this development on them.
Although they may not,
They might not.
but
They might see it
we don't know.
There's one particular, because one of a pair, one particular neighbour obviously is,
Yes,
it's a shared site, actually, access.
and it is going to, and it will materially alter the, because it's one site, it's going to materially alter the street views.
Yeah,
I mean, the neighbour might think, oh, that's a good idea.
Well, they may indeed, but,
I'm not sure it would alter the street soon.
well, maybe it won't, because you're
From the street.
it's
you can't
tucked
see.
away, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be fair, it is tucked away.
It might well alter the drives.
And I mean, I think quite a few of a lot of the properties in that close have been extended.
Yeah.
I think some have even been knocked down and rebuilt.
But-
I think they might have been, I mean, I don't, it's a bit off, big track to go
Yeah,
wandering
that's
around,
not.
but there's certainly on the corner there, there's a fairly, on a biggish house that's been built either as an infill or something knocked down and rebuilt, because you see it's to drive along.
Subject to, so personally, subject to Heather not raising anything when she looks at it about parking or trees or any of those intangibles, I don't think there's a lot wrong with that to me.
No, I mean, it's a big site.
You've got a message come up. I think that's on the actual calendar. Okay, so I think what I might propose is a recommendation of no objection subject to no loss of amenities to neighbouring properties. And then with the proviso that if when Heather looks at it, she comes back to us with a recommendation that's different from our own, that we would then consider it under delegated authority. Are we allowed to do that, Councillor?
I mean, I don't want to be a stickler, but if officially,
I'll take a decision, but
yeah,
not
if
take a
it's officially take a decision now, it's difficult for us to undo that decision. I would just be minded on this one to let Heather have a look at this early next week in detail. Share our thoughts with the full planning committee. If we feel like there needs to be a decision taken, then we can get your view on it and take that under urgent decisions. But that's probably the best way, rather than resolving something now. And then if we do find something
No, I
that's
agree. It's clear to kind of-
It's
kind of tied around hands
Yes.
potentially.
because otherwise it's not very easy to backtrack.
That's fine.
If you're happy for us, we'll share around views.
And leave open whether it's dealt with it. Delegated authority or it simply comes to this next committee meeting.
Yeah.
We know it'll be too late for calling, but
Yeah, well, I think what I would say is we would only take under delegated authority if it required a call in. Does that make sense?
what do we do? Well,
But no, as
it's
it,
not a decision, as a decision it requires a call.
no, as if it is a recommendation which under the proposals that we have set out would require a call in
Well,
or
I
would
think,
Could trip.
allow a
Could trip.
call in.
in other words, yeah, refusal or.
So if it isn't no objection, then I think we would consider that under
delegated, but if it is no objection, I think we'll bring it back to this committee just to make sure.
Yep.
Next time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I haven't done anything which is against the constitution of the council. No, good, always a good day when I haven't. 5/2022/1840 Farthings Close. Your observations on that one, Phil?
1 second. So observations on this one. Essentially, the conclusion is no objection, provided the proposed materials are deemed to be keeping the surrounding area. There's nothing material there that officers have raised, not in the conservation area, no tree works proposed, sits on a spacious plot.
Any comments from councillors? All in favour of the recommendation? Wonderful stuff. 5/2022/1825 not meet the criteria. 5/2022/1769 is us, and therefore no recommendation from us. 5/2022/1817 77 observations on this one.
Yeah, so the observations here conclude that there's no objection, subject to there being sufficient parking provision on the site. To remove all bay window, extend the front living room forwards, create additional living space, two-storey rear extension across the width of the property. And the other points you can see there, no trees to be removed, not in the conservation area. Yeah, no objection put forward based on officer observations. Images on the screen.
Quite a lot going on in Overstone.
Yeah. None from me, I should. If an underground floor, it might be quite difficult for me to.
Parking space.
Yeah, it's quite a good drive. Oh, no, so I don't have one. Sorry. I thought you were talking about 77.
There's some extensive plan documents there too.
The little porch area, if I really wanted to, I could probably get half a metre out of Roger, but for the sake of a bigger bathroom, I think we couldn't bother.
And most of the changes at the back, isn't it?
Yeah.
Front porch. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further comments from council? All in favour of the recommendation? Lovely. 5/2022/1832 does not meet the criteria. So on to 5/2022/1804 14 Park Avenue Sale. Your observations on this one?
Yeah, so there are issues with this one. The proposal is to demolish the existing dated and poor conditions detached 3-bed property that you can see on the image on the screen here. In conclusion, observations is to recommend refusal. The observation deemed that the proposed development is out of scale, character, and at odds with the design of neighbouring properties, leading to a detrimental impact on Harpenden conservation area. There's also expressed concern around the no formal tree replanting scheme, including the proposal where they set out that they will be removing a number of trees and hedges.
Lovely. Well, not better. As the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, remember the design is very ugly.
It's like
Okay,
like a bomb.
yeah.
It's absolutely, well, doesn't keeping it all.
Existing.
Well, certainly, I forget others that are like that, but.
Yes, but it doesn't, it's just
That's
not keeping
that's very
at
important.
the conservation area.
Might be slightly bigger than the whole.
Oh, yes. The size probably again, for the street isn't a problem.
I don't think it's the size, it's the design, and I think because, and it's one of those things, isn't it, when the design isn't right, actually then the size looks wrong, even though it's not out of,
Looks like it's a substation.
but it makes it look, because of the design, it makes it look very dominant, doesn't it?
I think we should major on the design problems.
It's not according to you.
No, it's detrimental to the yeah, there's nothing about that.
So the reasons for refusal on here are scale, character, design, detrimental impacts on conservation area.
So what's this, is the pool house?
We've got one of it in the scale of the plot.
It's the last one.
It, he's written this,
Not quite an overdevelopment, does it? It's on the edge. It's your document. Yeah. That's right. Sorry. Like I'm giving my own agenda there. So is there anything you'd like to add to the recommendation?
Well, so I think we should be stronger on the core design.
Yeah.
Said onto the design of delivering property, which is yeah, well, that's true, but I think we should find a stronger formula of words.
Do you have a suggestion?
I suppose you're saying it's neighbouring properties and the conservation.
One small change would be where it says to be out of scale, character and adorns, I would say, and of poor design being adorns.
Poor design drifting into,
Yes, I wouldn't say poor design, because it's,
makes, I mean, it makes it sound like we're saying you don't
we're
like.
giving our personal view of the actual, we're giving an aesthetic something, which, and we may or may not actually aesthetic as like design, but it's what matters is the design is wrong in the context.
Yes. So the design of
Out of keeping.
the conservation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Well,
can say.
the Dominance policy in 5 is permission regarding only where a high standard of design is achieved. Now, to say it's a poor standard of design, it's not wrong because it's just copying what's
Wrong
in
with the content, yes.
just copying the.
But is that
Yeah.
not subjective?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's inviting us to give an opinion on the standard of design. Giving it. If you use the same form of words.
I think if you're going to say poor design, you need to qualify by saying poor design in terms of being out of keeping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Housekeeping.
I think the fact that it's out of keeping is the planning point.
Is the planning point.
Yeah, but I think you get that poor design. You go to odds with the design of the neighbourhood.
Yes, well, yes, I think you've got to qualify why. Yes, you've got to qualify, say poor design, you've got to qualify why.
Yeah, we already asked that, yeah.
I mean, I think the point is that it's out of keeping for me.
Yeah.
I'm not actually that bothered by this. I mean, I wouldn't design it myself, but I've seen worse that have come through our committee. And I mean, that's obviously not a, having seen worse is obviously not a planning consideration. But my point is, I think.
You can't bring a yardstick, can it?
No.
I've seen words.
I think the point is that it's out of keeping
Yeah.
because of the fact that the design is out of keeping.
Also,
rather than-
poor design and which. It's a normal high standard design. In our own policy, plan, all of it's visually attractive, designed to high quality. So I think we're entitled to say more visually unattractive. Or design picks up not a high point. But I like to play back the words that are in the policy, whether it's an ordinance or.
I can see that, yeah.
We're gonna rest with.
It's the heat.
I think
The machine.
yeah, I would personally stick with poor design in terms of being out of keeping with the conservation area therefore will have a detrimental impact on the Hartland conservation area.
Yeah.
Did you get that? Doc?
I did, yes.
So with that addition, all in favour of the recommendation? Lovely. And now the next question, call in. I think personally, given the location, I think it should be called in. All in favour of calling it in? Lovely. Unanimous. 5/2022/1814.
Sorry, we just check on the dates.
Yeah, it's the last,
Last one.
yeah, it's the last
Okay,
week.
so it's around to Friday next week.
No, a bit later.
Okay, oh,
The end of the month.
yeah. All right, okay, fine, so 2 weeks from Friday.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's 26.
5/2022/1814, the old apiary site.
So just on this, what St Albans had provided is the model for specimen wording for callings. They had it and they were going to update it.
There is a form.
Is there?
There is an updated form. Yeah, they've shared an updated form.
Okay,
Well, they've shared the form that is in place now. Whether that's updated or not, I don't know, but that's the form. There is a calling form to be used.
I was just speculating it because they were going to update it. And I wouldn't
Yeah.
know they would send it to.
Yeah, the version they've sent round is the one that they're asking people to complete under the new process.
Okay.
We'll circulate it again.
Okay, old apiary. I mean, just to note, it is disappointing to me that the scheme has been amended from 7 to 5. It's just a personal point, but I'll hand over to Carl for your observations on it more generally.
Yeah, Chair. So I've been, where there's no objection, I've not really been setting out the officer observations and details, but I think it's worth just pointing you to them in this case, because essentially what we've got here is change in the previous granted application, where it's really around enlarging properties, including additional bedrooms, total in 3 or in each of the properties. The reason that's given for that is that market conditions suggest that 3 bedrooms are more attractive than 2 bedrooms. The footprint of each of the property, I understand, has not been dramatically increased. Parking division remains the same, but there is a change between the 2 and 3 bedrooms. To decide as to the reason why that might be the case. But our observations are that there's no objection subject to appropriate design. Generally, I normally would say it's quite disappointing that when you get these changes to the dwelling numbers retrospectively. And speaking personally, there's normally a reason why a developer might do that.
I think it's disappointing both that we're losing 2. I mean, I know we've lost 2 because they withdrew that prior to the one that they got permitted. But I think it's disappointing as well that we're losing 2-bedroom bungalows that, have previously been agreed. But
Amazon too would have been popular, actually.
is this not, sorry, just to check, is this not Greenbelt? Because I thought it was Greenbelt last time.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it will be Greenbelt.
So does it still require, now that it's got planning permission, is it still required to meet special considerations or whatever it is for building on the Greenbelt, for changing it from a 2-bed to a 3-bed? Because I'd imagine part of the reason they got planning permission was because of the need for 2-bed properties.
I will have to check that formally.
Yeah.
However, my observation, speaking personally, is I don't think that's the case that they have to do that. And that is sometimes potentially the attraction to a developer putting in for one thing and then making an amendment later on.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Because might protect the loss. I'm not sure there's any grounds to, I don't think there are any grounds to refuse.
No, but if you were proposing from scratch 5 3-bedroom properties on this, I don't know whether, given its green belt, I don't know whether we would give the same recommendation.
If a green belt is meant to maintain an open development, it has to maintain an open.
And as to demonstrate special need for
Yeah.
development on the green belt.
There's also part of it, if I recall the plans correctly, there's an area that wasn't developed.
Yeah.
It was going to be a nature area.
Yes,
Yeah, I think that's still
that's right,
Yeah.
yes.
But still it's to the right.
And that's the news they haven't.
They haven't.
I don't think the footprint is materially altered.
No, what they've done is they've taken away 2 of the bungalows
Yes.
and left
And
the
one
other
other,
5
yeah.
roughly
But
where
the-
they are.
but the actual footprint hasn't been materially altered, which is why.
Yeah.
It would be difficult to come to a different
Yeah, I know. I just,
view.
And I think the wildlife area, PIP, is linked to your point around the green belt and
Yeah.
having that in place.
Keeps the.
Keeps it, I think.
So that couldn't be developed in the future.
we could, but then have to then take it out of the green belt. So you'd have the same dance next time as the practice stuff.
Yeah, however, it would make it easier for that to be developed in the future. The building on the rest of it.
Use having. And when you read the principle. If everything has plots, I think he would be. Pushed to stop the change.
No, I know, I'm just lamenting the fact that
Yes,
the way that this has been done more than anything else.
yeah, but it's not uncommon, is it?
No, but this is a
I don't
particular,
want that in the bed, I'm just pointing out it's
this is a particularly significant.
what I've always referred to as mission. What that
I'm just looking at the heritage zone access statement, which is there. And I mean, there's not a reason to refuse, but this does annoy me that the site is located at the northern end of Harpenden. Really, it is. Pick up that, but that's upside down. That happens so often. These things are written by people who don't do any research.
Either that or it's been written by someone in East Common.
It's situated on the edge of the metropolitan green belt. Okay, yes, I've got that right.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately, I don't think there's a reason to refuse. But I think if it was coming in as this originally, I think we might have come to a different view. But in any case, it hasn't, so this is all sort of hypothetical.
It's just if they kept a couple of 2 beds. I think, you know.
Well, it would have just been nice to have 2-bed bungalows.
Yeah.
Which is something that we don't have a lot of. People experience. Okay, I think, are we minded to go with the recommendation? All in favour? Yes. Right, 2022 1856 95 Elmston Road.
So this one, Chair, proposals to convert the existing garage into a study utility room, changes to the front bay window, install solar panels on the front roof. There are some similar changes to neighbouring property, not conservation area, no tree works. 2 off-street parking spaces are provided. The conclusion here is to express some concern that there will be insufficient parking vision to satisfy the requirements of what will be a 5-bedroom property.
2 or 3 parking spaces is pretty good, isn't it?
Well, in fact,
It's worth noting as well, potentially, that there is
think if this is which one, if this is the one I think it is, there is a parking area opposite it on street parking. So there is some on street nearby. That's the point of it. So I don't think they would push you to parking. Obviously, we have to mention.
Okay, so it gets 2 roof lights like the one next door existing. And some of bubbles.
Yeah. I imagine it will look like the one next door.
Yeah.
The front, yeah, okay. But at the back, it gets a big dormer, huge dormer. May or may not be like the one next door. Is it back?
Yes, because there's one, there's an existing one, isn't there?
It's quite a lot of dormers.
Quite a lot of dormers along there.
My upstairs neighbour, I think, has them.
Not going to get many cars in that garage, are they?
No, not these days.
I think you can go.
No, that's where the parking is from.
Yeah.
And it's-
I can just about get my car in my garage. You can take everything else out of my garage. That's effectively similar size. Presumably they're taking off the green area at the front to make second parking space. Imagine.
Yes, I was taking some bit off.
It looks like they're already parked on it anyway.
Yes.
Picture.
Any comments from council? You mind to go with the recommendation on that table? Lovely. If we have, because it's an express concern, we have to vote on whether to call it in. I think probably we won't be calling this in, so just to put that to a vote, for no call in, all in favour. Lovely. And with that, I move on to item 8. We haven't received any appeals. Preservation of the tree works for noting. Conservation area tree works and technical applications for noting. The list of weekly St Albans District Council decisions for noting. The next planning committee meeting is being held on Tuesday, the 30th of August in this chamber. Is it still Plans North? I thought we'd got rid of Plans North.
We'll have the joy of one more.
One more Plans North being held on Monday the 15th at 7 p.m, presumably in the council chamber of St Albans. With that, I bring this meeting to a close at 10:17. That's some short one.
That's what I think about it. I said it, I'll probably send my apologies for the 30th because I'm leaving fairly early on the 31st, week off week's holiday.
Somewhere nice.